On the first Sunday after Easter, we are beginning a new sermon series because I think God's inviting us into a new season. And this particular series got stuck in my head, I'd say about a month ago. I was having a conversation with Kathy Berry, and she's not here today, so I'm going to pick on her anyhow. And we were just talking about what God's been doing in her life. And she was saying, she said, PK, you know what? In the last year, God has just changed me in ways that are so incredible and so profound. It's kind of like he lit a fire and this transformation is taking place. And y'all know me, so I started to stomp and clap and get excited. And I said, well, what's different? And Kathy said, you know, this is going to sound silly, but it's real simple. The more that I fall in love with God, the more I realize He loves me. The more I realize He loves me, the more I can love my neighbor. That's it. And we talked about what that looks like for her life, but that particular phrase just kind of got stuck in my head. Now, it's not like it's a new one. She stole it from Jesus. But as I was listening to what she was saying, I thought, Lord, boy, you're right. It all hangs on that. In Matthew's gospel, some folks come up to Jesus towards the end of his life, and they're trying to test him, they're trying to trick him, and so they say, of all of the commandments in the entirety of the Bible, and at that point it was the Old Testament, right? So on all the commandments in the whole of the Old Testament, of which there are quite a few, what's the most important? And Jesus' response is simply this. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says this, all of the law, so the first 5 books of the Bible, and all of the prophets, right? Isaiah, Jeremiah, where they expand on the commands that God has given us. All the law, all the prophets, they hang on these 2 commandments. It's like Jesus is saying, if you and I can learn how to love God and receive His love, because it's a two-way street. If we can then learn how to love each other the way that God loves us, everything else falls into place. Because everything hangs on those 2 realities. Everything. Now, I was thinking about that this week, and I thought, Lord, they're going to look back at me, and I know the look I'm going to get. The look of the people who go, we know we learned that in Sunday school. That's nice. Sure, it really does all hang on this. Your ability to be a parent, the way that God called you to be, for those in this room who've got kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews, your ability to love them and invite them to know what their life looks like in God's incredible plan, it hangs on loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. Your ability to do the ministry that God's called you to do, and unless you are me and Jen, He did not call you to that ministry in this place. The ministry He called you to do that you go to work at 40 plus hours every week, the ministry that He's called you to in your home or in your community, it hangs on loving God with everything you have and loving your neighbor as yourself. The ability to do anything and be the person who God's called you to be hangs on those 2 things. And you know the same is true for us as a community of faith. I think God's doing something incredible in our midst right now. I believe that God's getting us ready for a new season in our life together. And I'm watching Him do it in some really cool ways. Things like the hospitality ministry that's coming together and saying our goal is to take God at His word and become a church that says we're going to universalize the neighbor, right? You're going to love your neighbor? That's a universal command. And we're going to personalize the stranger so that people are known the way that God knows them. I think God's up to something. You know, this past week, we found out at council meeting that Access Services, which is a Christian organization that works with people with mental health illness and also any sort of cognitive or physical disability. We had them out here for a training about a month ago, and they pegged us. They said, we saw FBC Norristown. We think something's happening there. We would like you to become the hub for mental health ministries in the greater Norristown area. God's doing something. He's inviting us to be so much bigger than we've ever been even before. And it all hangs on loving God and loving our neighbor. So what I would like us to do for all of this month, into the month of May, we're just going to unpack those two scriptures. And to unpack them, we need to go back to where they came from, right? Because Jesus was quoting from Old Testament scriptures. When he talks about loving God and neighbor, he's quoting straight out of Deuteronomy chapter 6. So I want to ask you to go ahead and open your Bibles there. Because I want us to look at this passage, to understand it in its context, to think and to pray through what's it mean for you and me as individuals, what's it mean for us as a church to love our God with everything that we have. So while you're turning to Deuteronomy 6, and we're going to pick up in verse 4, let me tell you a little bit of context, right? See, Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. And in reality, it's a covenant renewal. When the Lord brought the people of Israel out of Egypt, he brought them to Mount Sinai, and Moses received the 10 commandments, or the 10 words. God sent Moses down from that mountain to the people of Israel, and he said to them, do you want to enter into a covenant with God? Covenant where the Lord is going to make promises to you to be your God and your Father and your Master, your Protector, your Provider, and you're going to make promises to God. Carry out those 10 commandments to honor him with your life. And that first generation of people that came out, they said, yeah. And God looked back at them and said, you're going to break it. But I'm going to keep it. So the first time, that's the book of Exodus, right? They make this covenant together. And part of that covenant was the Lord said, I'm taking you somewhere you've never been before. I'm going to bring you into the promised land. And Exodus tells us, and Numbers tells us that they made it to the promised land. And you remember what happens, right? 12 spies go in, 12 spies come out. 10 of the spies say, eh. They say, there's really tall people in the promised land, and they apparently decide that they're taller than God. They say there's really thick walls in these fortified cities, and apparently they get it in their head that those walls are stronger than God. So they won't go. For the next 40 years, the people of Israel wander in the desert. Right? They wander around all of this area for 40 solid years. Because the Lord said to him, if you don't trust me, you won't come with me, then you don't go in. So for 40 years, they wandered in the desert, while that first generation, the one that said, we don't trust that God is big and God is strong, died. When we pick up in Deuteronomy, 40 years have passed. The first generation is no longer there. We're now talking to a second generation, indeed, even a third generation. We're talking to people who were young when they crossed the Red Sea. We're talking to people who were born in that middle of the wilderness. And God comes to them, and he says, we got to renew our promises. We need to renew the covenant. And that's the book of Deuteronomy. As they're renewing this covenant, God's going to lay out all of the stipulations of the covenant, everything that he promises to them and they promise to him. But before he can do that, before he can ever talk about obedience, God's got to talk about love. Because it all hangs on that. So let's read this together. Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning at verse 4. Let's read down through verse 9. It says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be put upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. This is the word of our God, and our thanks belongs to him. Amen? Amen. When you look at this passage, this one's famous, guys. It's called the Shema. And observant Jews to this day recite and pray the Shema at least twice every single day, because they said it's the heart of everything that they believe about God. It's the heart of the covenant. It's the heart of the reality of who they're making promises to and what they're promising to do. And it's going to take us a couple of weeks to walk through even just these verses. Because I hope you can see at first glance that when the Lord talks about love, first he talks about something that's deeply personal. Love me with all of your heart and soul and strength. But he also talks about something that is daringly public. Impress it on your hearts. Teach it to your children. Put it on the door frames of your house and take it all the way to the public square. Next week, we're going to talk about daringly public. This week, we're going to talk about the fact that loving God, like really loving God, not just singing Jesus loves me, this I know, but actually loving God is deeply, deeply personal. And I would argue that this deeply personal love is grounded in a deeply personal story. A deeply personal story about who God is. Because that's where verse 4 starts, right? The Shema says, "Hear, O Israel." I love it. Listen up. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Now, theologians, including Jewish theologians, have been debating literally for millennia how you best translate that particular sentence. Because the way that that is written in the Hebrew language is it skips the to-be verb. Where's Matt at? Hi, Matt. Matt harasses all the West Virginians in this room. That would be Brandon, Ashley, and myself, that we do not like the to-be verb. Like we just say, I'm going to walk the dog. I don't need to tell you that, we skip the to-be verb, right? We say, I'm going to do the wash. And he says, I'm supposed to say, I am about to do the wash. He doesn't like my English, but it's biblical. There you go. This particular verb, sentence, can be translated at least two ways. It depends on where you put the is. So you could say, Yahweh is God. He's the one. And that would mean Yahweh, right? That's God's covenant name. It means I am, right? Whenever you read in the Old Testament, Lord, L-O-R-D, capitalized, the word was Yahweh. So you could read this and you could say, Yahweh is God. He's the only one. There's one unique God, and his name is Yahweh. You could also read the sentence and you could say, Yahweh God, he is one. He's complete. He is everything that you're ever going to need, all summed up in one. So you could read that particular sentence and you could say, okay, here, First Baptist Church, God is unique. Or you could hear it and say, God is complete. I'm not sure that we actually really need to settle on one or the other. Because the reality is that both statements are true. And if you want to sound like an infomercial, you say God is one of a kind. Or he is all in one. When we begin to look at this invitation to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, which is what Jesus quotes in Matthew, Mark, and in Luke, we've got to remember that there's a verse right before that says, the one you love with everything you have, he's one of a kind. There is nobody and nothing else like him. And he is the all-in-one. That means everything you've ever needed, comfort, security, purpose, healing, love, is found in him. Nobody and nothing else. Does that make sense? So when we read that sentence, the sentence that to this day Jewish people are saying 2 times every single day, it is this constant reminder, that's who my God is. My God is unique, and my God is complete. There is nobody else like him. And I don't need there to be, because he's everything that I need. Therefore, you go to verse 5. Now, In my brain, I would have thought that the next word that would happen would be, if this is in fact who your God is, he's unique and complete, he's the one-of-a-kind God, he's everything you need, do what he says. Aren't you grateful I'm not Moses? We'd be done. There'd be no more need for Deuteronomy after that. Maybe you aren't glad. It'd be really short. That's who he is. Do it. That's not what it says. And the reason for this is really simple. You know, in the book of Deuteronomy especially, but throughout the whole Bible, and Jesus, it's on his lips as well, obedience and love are interchangeable. If I obey my God, this one who is unique and complete, it's because I love him. And if I love him, I will obey him. The Gospel of John, Jesus puts it this way, right? He says, if you love my Father, you will keep his commands. And obedience, nobody has an obedience issue. None of us. You got some struggle in your life that you just say, God, I don't agree with you on this. I'm not going to do what it is that you asked me to do. We don't want to stop what he says stop or start what he says start. You don't have an obedience issue. You got a love issue. Every time. And that's why the Lord says, if you know who I am, he's not worried about obedience just yet. He says, love me. And the words he used for love are profound. So let's walk through them for a second. And then we'll talk about what that looks like. So the Hebrew language says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart. Now, in Greek, and indeed in modern day English, if we talk in heart, we mean ushy-gushy, right? We mean our emotions. But the Hebrew language, we were friends, Hebrews and I. It's not about emotions. In the Hebrew language, your heart represented the seat of your intellect, or your thought, or your worldview. So to love God with all of your heart is to love God, if we were going to translate it into modern day English, with your mind. Right? Love God with every bit of your thought process. That's a profound statement. And I think we've got to talk about what it means for a second. I'm not utterly convinced that to love God with all of your mind means constantly be, thinking love thoughts to the Lord. Like you are Hallmark cards and they just run through your brain all the time. You give it a shot. I think that's weird, but go for it. I think that when we're talking about loving God with our heart, or right in English, our minds, what that means is being a person who's willing to say, in every thought, in every circumstance, in every situation I'm trying to understand or unpack, my first thought is I have a God who is one of a kind. I have a God who is able to provide everything I'm ever going to need. And he becomes the way that I see the world. So anytime I'm coming up against a struggle, my first thought is not, I gotta fix this. My first thought is, my God is so much bigger than this. Anytime I come upon a problem I don't know the answer to, my first thought is, but Lord, you do. When I'm finding myself saying, God, I'm in desperate need of healing, to be able to say, and that's who you are. To love God with my heart, to love God with my mind, is to be the person who's willing to say, I know who my God is. But Lord, my God is one. He is everything I will ever need, and he is unlike anybody who has ever interacted with me. That means if I really struggle with distrust or fear of other people, and maybe I got really good reason to, my first thought is, Lord, people might harm me, but you won't. Because he's unlike anybody else. Does that make sense? Yeah. I struggle to love God with my heart. Some days, because some days I don't do such a hot job. Some days my mind is pretty fixed on me, or is pretty fixed on this world. But my heart's not actually directed towards a God who's so much greater than I am. Do you know what changes that? My own story. You see, this is a deeply personal kind of love, isn't it? The truth of the matter is that I could on the outside tell you that I love God with my whole heart, and it is only in my deeply personal self that I actually know if I do or don't. Because what I tell you and what I think, let me just tell you, friends, are two different things. I have not reached the age that my granny reached when she told me that when you get to my age, you don't have to have a filter anymore. This is a total sidebar, but I still think if you love Jesus, I don't care what age you are, you need a filter. Just throw that out there. This is a deeply personal love. But my deeply personal love that transforms the way I think comes from my deeply personal stories. You know, Israel had deeply personal stories. You go back and you look at Exodus, and you can see how what God did was he came to Israel in the middle of Egypt when there was nothing but a bunch of gods to be worshipped. In the 10 plagues, he systematically destroyed every one of those gods. You know, in the 10 plagues, he went toe-to-toe with them. And I thought about showing you pictures and all sorts of fun stuff this morning, but I'm going to skip it. In the 10 plagues, the Lord came and he went against the gods of the Nile River. And he said, I can turn the Nile River into blood. What can your God do? Oh, look, nothing. He went against the god, this one's my favorite, Hecate. Hecate was a goddess of fertility, and she was always portrayed with a frog face. Okay? Frog face. When you read the 10 plagues and you reach, I think it's plague number 4, you reach the frogs, and Moses says that God's going to send frogs and they're going to be everywhere. And he includes your bed. See, Laura's already laughing. I'm sorry. That's funny. Because the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is looking and going, y'all want to have children? There's frogs in your beds. Yeah, you can finish that sentence, can't you? Every one of those 10 plagues, God came and he showed Israel, I'm one of a kind. There is no one who compares to me. And then for 40 years, he protected, he provided, he gave them clothing, he gave them food. For 40 years, he was a pillar of fire at night so they knew that they were never alone. He was a pillar of cloud by day so that they got to know exactly where he wanted them to go. And they came to realize, you know what? We don't need all those other gods. We have one. And their very deeply personal stories of encountering God, the one, made it so they can love him with their heart. That's the same thing for me. And the more that I encounter my King, the more that I discover that my Father loves me in a way that nobody else, even those who really try, the more I find that when I am afraid of what people are going to do, my mind can change. And my thought can begin to become, yeah, but you love me. And you're going to protect me. And I don't really know what's about to happen here, God, but I know who you are. That's the deeply personal love. I bet you got stories like that too. If we're going to love God with our whole heart, we love him with our thoughts. They begin to turn towards the Lord. And let me just tell you a secret. That won't happen overnight. But it does happen when I make the conscious decision to say, I want to love you with my heart. I want my thought process to turn to you first. You know, the more I do it, the more it just becomes the way I always think. Kind of like those old ways of thinking were just the way I always thought. If I'm going to love God with my heart, I love him with my thought process. So let's talk about this next word. Soul. Now, for most of us, because we come out of a kind of a Greek background, when we think of soul, did y'all have to pray this creepy prayer as a child? Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And then the creepy part, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I could never sleep after I prayed that. I'm not even joking. Okay. So many nightmares, like I can't go to sleep. Anyhow, we tend to see body is what's here and soul is what will go on to heaven. The Hebrew understanding of soul, though, of the word that gets translated as soul, is really different. It's not the separation of body and something Casper-like that will go on to eternity. That word This one that gets translated as soul, it literally means your whole life. And it's better translated as your passions, your desires, and your volition. Right? So your ability to will something and make it happen. To love God with my heart is to love God with my thoughts, but to love God with my soul is to sing with all my passions, all my desires, and my ability to make something happen. God, I love you with that. See, I can love God with my heart, and I can think all sorts of thoughts about who He is, that He is my one God, and He is unique, and He is complete, and there's nobody like you. And then I can do the same things I've always done. We got us a breakdown in love that are right about that point. If I love God with my soul, I love Him with my whole life. And that means that my whole life is directed towards that one God who's unlike anybody else. That'll change things for me. A couple of weeks when we start talking about loving your neighbor, we're going to talk about what does it mean to love the person that hurt you, that you have the right to hold a grudge against. You know, in my mind, or my heart, I can love God. I can think, you're the one who, from the cross, said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I believe it, I see it, I rationally understand it. And then with my life, I can do the same old thing to the person that hurt me that I have always done. But loving God is embodied. Loving God is my whole life, all my passions directed towards Him. You know, that means simple things too. It means at your workplace, that you get to walk into work and say, I'm here because I love God. Lord, I think that you put me here. And so all my passions, all my energies today, they're directed towards making you known. Whatever it is you do. Christians ought to be the best employees and employers anybody's ever seen. Best work ethic and best work-life balance. Did we touch on it? Somebody's boo-boos right there? That's part of loving God. Because everything within me, I don't just think it, but I do it. And then there's this last one, and this one's fun. We translate it into English as strength. I don't know why we translate it into English as strength, because nowhere else in the whole Old Testament do we translate it like a noun. What it literally means is muchness. Right? That Kathy's making a face. That's why we translate it as strength, because that just is bad English. But it's really good love. What it literally means, it conveys this idea of no holds barred. An over-the-top love. That there's nothing that God doesn't get. You know the way that you felt when, what was that sports team? They won some big thing back in like January. Oh, I did. Okay. What are they called?
The Eagles.
Oh, the Eagles. Right. So when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and you jumped up and down, and you screamed, and you cried, and yay, all that stuff. Or my neighborhood did at least. That's over the top. Right?
Amen.
Some might even call it muchness. That's what God gets. Now listen, I don't think the Lord is saying to love me with everything that you have means that you have to jump up and down all the time. It does mean that's not a little bit of love. That He doesn't get a little bit of me or a piece of my love in some place. It means there's genuinely no holds barred. There's nothing He can't touch, nothing He can't talk to. There's no way I can't express that love to Him. Everywhere, anytime, any place. That's deeply personal. And we're going to talk next week about how that love has to become daringly public. That is so significant to the covenant. It's part of how other people come to encounter the Lord. And frankly, it's how we actually challenge ourselves to love, heart, soul, and strength. But first we have to start here. We got to start with a deeply personal love. And I am utterly convinced that our deeply personal love is tied to deeply personal stories. Stories of you and I coming to realize that the God we serve, He really is one. He is unlike anybody, anything you have ever encountered before. And he is everything. So you have homework. Would you give me the last slide? Thank you, sir. There we go. Now, I will not be passing out stickers. There is no test. But I am pretty convinced that if you'll do your homework, you'll hear from the Lord. See, we're going to continue this conversation for the next 2 months. We're going to talk about what does it mean to love God with everything that we have. And we will continue a conversation on what does it look like to love neighbor as self. But the reality is, it all hangs on a deeply personal love with the Lord. And that is contingent upon your deeply personal stories. So what I'd like to invite each one of us to do this week, whatever way you like to do it. If you have a journal, get it out. If you've been supposed to be starting journaling for a while, well, here's your chance. If you prefer typing, if you just want to sit down and talk with your shepherd, the person that you meet with, to talk about what God's doing in your world, well, this will make a great conversation starter. I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. Sit down with the Lord and ask him, hey, God, what's our story? How have you shown me? How have you shown me that you're unique and complete? Because you have the stories. If you know the Lord, you have those stories. And if you don't, well, why don't you start a conversation with him about, well, what would that look like? God, in what ways do I need to know that you are unlike my parents? Unlike the culture I live in. You're unlike me. In what ways, Lord, do I need to know that you're unlike the picture I have of who God is? Maybe you're actually more loving. Maybe the truth is, God, you're actually more wrathful than my picture. You do have a black and white way of looking at the world. Would you ask God, what's your story? How has he shown you in those deeply personal ways who he is? And I'm going to invite you to write it down because sometimes we need to go back and look. We need to go back and be reminded of the truths that he has shown us or that we're inviting him into. And then once you get those stories down, do the second part. Ask him, God, how do you want me to grow in my love for you? Some of us in here, man, you got the soul love. You said, Lord, you give my whole life. All my passions are directed towards you, but your thought process never quite made the transition. And maybe you need to say, Lord, I want to love you with my heart/mind. Some of us in here, maybe you always are thinking it. Your soul's there, but nobody, including you, would ever accuse you of loving God with muchness. What would that look like? Come and ask our God so that he can invite each of us to this deeply personal love. Let's pray together. This morning, as you come before the God who is one, I invite you to come and worship. You're going to just come and celebrate who he is or how he has shown you that he is unlike anybody else. You do that. If this morning you need to come and say, God, I need a personal story. Or just say, Lord, I want to love you in a different way. Start that conversation now. Father God, today we thank you. Thank you for deeply personal love, for the ways that you love each one of us, and the stories that you've gifted us with. Lord, I ask that this week, as we take a challenge, this week as we ask you to tell us our story with you, that that you would speak in profound ways. Remind us of the stories we long forgot. Show us the ones we never quite recognized. And let us celebrate, Lord. Let us celebrate the ones that we've known all along. Lord, as we celebrate those stories that you have given to us, the ways that you've shown us who you are, God, I ask that you would invite us to love you ever more deeply. Lord, I thank you for brothers and sisters who are walking this journey together. And I ask for each one of us that, Lord, we would truly be able to say, I know who my God is. I love him with my heart, with my soul, with all of my strength. Jesus, we pray these things in your name. Amen. Amen.